Nice necklace. I got one just like it, made out of noses.
Hey, you guys. Hey, you guys. Hey, you guys. Hey, you guys. Hey, you guys.
Welcome to the You Guys podcast. I'm Rob, this is Liam, and this week we watch Universal Soldier, a zombie film from 1992, reanimated team of soldiers from Vietnam. All American soldiers, where at least 3 of them are played by a Belgian, a Swede, and a German. The Unisols are an elite fighting force. They can't die, well, unless you give them a tan. They only unlive to follow orders. Well, that is for maybe an hour until they relive the lives they had right up until they died. If you wanted to go home, then once brought back, that's your driving focus. Or if you made a necklace out of ears, well, then you go straight back to that weird piece of jewelry making. I mean, shit, I would hate to see the Unisol that died horny as fuck.
It's a good point, actually. Yeah.
I mean, come on. However you die, I would hate to see that guy just...
Yeah, if Jean-Claude Van Damme's character had died in a Vietnamese brothel, like this is a very, very different movie, isn't it? A very disturbing movie to say the least. But the plot is barely there, is it? Like the kind of, to signify their actions, whatever you want to call it, it's barely a line in the script. It's like, all right, they're super soldiers. We want them to fight off again. This is really a face-off movie before face-off. Like, this was the start of that crazy. It never used to happen before. The idea of like having two, what was at the time, I guess, relatively big stars facing off against each other. Like, this was before Demolition Man with Snipes and Stallone, obviously before Cage versus Travolta, before Alien versus Predator, all those things. This kind of started all that. But, it was
classic face-off films, yeah.
Yeah, but this was the face-off of the 2 American soldiers who clearly weren't American. It's a great point straight from the top. Like, couldn't you at least have got maybe half the soldiers to sound remotely American? Yeah. I don't mean that in a racist way, but it's the most European take on a U.S. Army I've ever heard.
The throwaway line they do for Van Damme. Oh yeah, he's got French heritage. I mean,
but at least they give him the name, don't they? At least he's Luc Devereaux, so he sounds French. He sounds Belgian French, whatever you want to call it. Dolph Lundgren, who doesn't sound any more English, is called Andrew fucking Scott, the most kind of standard American generic name you can imagine. There's no way his character was born Andrew Scott. There's no fucking way.
They don't even try with Ralph Mueller. Don't speak.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. He's the guy you get. For those who don't know, if you just need a giant human being to be on screen, he's your guy. It doesn't matter where he's from. He is just generic giant human being, and he does the job perfectly.
Absolutely. But like I said, this room, and then poor Tom Tiny Lister, just like he's there, and then all of a sudden he's blown up. And no, was he blown? Yeah, no, he was set on fire, wasn't he? And then,
yeah, he was at the gas station when they got set on fire, and you have that great scene at the supermarket when Dolph's trying to bring them back to life.
And Ralph Mueller's eating just raw steak.
Yeah. And he gives that fantastic speech. As Dolph Lundgren's character becomes increasingly belligerent towards the end of the film in just a spectacularly fun way. Like, what it reminded me of was the Kurgan in Highlander. Yeah. When, you kind of go back and rewatch that film and go, my God, that character goes absolutely batshit at the end of this film. And that's what he does, especially from that moment onwards, when he gives that speech about kicking ass and kissing ass and taking
I was going to do that speech, but I don't have the knack of accents or trying accents that you do. So,
but I even if you don't do the accent, it's like I'm fighting war, man, and I kick like, and it's like I got kick ass or kiss ass, and I'm busting heads. It's a nonsensical line, but he delivers it in that uniquely Dolph Lundgren way.
Listen to the whole of it. No. God damn it, the whole fucking platoon's dropping like flies. What the hell are you staring at? Do you have any idea what it's like out there? Do you? Well, I'm fighting this thing, man. It's like kick ass or kiss ass, and I'm busting heads. It's the only way to win this fucking war. And these shitheads, these yellow traitoring motherfuckers, they're everywhere. And I, Sergeant Andrew Scott of the US Army, I'm going to teach them all. Like, I love that line at the end. I, Sergeant Andrew Scott of the US Army. It's like me going, I, Robert Westgate of Cardiff, I'm going to live my life.
But he delivers it so the way, that last line was, I'm going to teach them all. And he kind of just waves his arm across the screen. But yeah, he has a few I mean, we had it a few weeks ago with like Keanu Reeves. I know he doesn't have an accent, but his kind of like odd acting style, should we say, gives everything a unique intonation. Obviously, this is different because Dolph Lundgren both isn't a fantastic actor and also has problems with English, but it oddly combines for this amazingly unique and memorable delivery. Yeah. Like that scene at the end, like how many times my brother and I have just gone, "It's empty! It's empty," you know, like it's like he forgot how to say the word empty at the end. But of course, that was the most important line of that. You know?
Me and my brother always used to do the other one when we say goodnight to each other before bed. Say goodnight, asshole. Good night, asshole.
Yeah. It's an oddly memorable film, and part of that is obviously, you know, we'll get to Jean-Claude Van Damme in a minute. But Dolph Lundgren, you know, probably going into this film was arguably the biggest star of the two, because, you know, this is the movie that really made Jean-Claude Van Damme. You know, he is obviously, you know, for people, kids who grew up in the 80s and stuff, we obviously all remember Bloodsport, we all remember Kickboxer. Some of us sadly remember No Retreat, No Surrender, probably best that's left in the past. And obviously Cyborg. And
No Retreat, No Surrender 2, 3, and 4.
Of course. But, you know, Cyborg, a movie we're kind of trying to bring up on every single episode now. This was the movie that really put him on the map and led to kind of, you know, his career from like 91 through 95, when he was one of the biggest stars in the world. But I feel like Dolph Lundgren, they never quite knew what to do with him. But I think fundamentally where he's best is as a villain. I think his three most memorable roles are Rocky IV's Ivan Drago, this. And it's an odd one because I think they didn't get the tone of the movie right. But I think he's fantastic in The Expendables, the first movie, when he's playing the bad guy. Because he is a threatening human being. Like, that is an important part of being a villain. Like, you see Dolph Lundgren in this film and you're like, I would not mess with him. And it's one of the stranger aspects of the film. And it's true of Dolph Lundgren, who is shredded in this film, of course, and Dolph Lundgren, is that these people in, is it Arizona it's set? I think it is, isn't it? Oh, a lot of the film is, before it moves on to Utah and eventually Louisiana, sorry. And how many people just want to fuck with these guys? Like, there's a bit when he's walking towards a bar, Dolph Lundgren, this giant human being, absolutely shredded. He's got a necklace with ears on it. And you get this little tiny hillbilly who's like, I'm going to talk shit to this guy. If I saw that guy walk towards me, I'm like, I ain't saying shit.
It's not just talk shit to the guy, right? It was my quote at the beginning, nice necklace. You see this man walking towards you with a necklace made out of ears. Maybe you go, yeah, we'll give him space. Like, we'll just let him crack on.
Yeah, you would definitely be like, I'm not just going to immediately start mouthing off. And the same is true of that bizarre diner scene with Jean-Claude Van Damme, where it's a diner, but for some odd reason, all the toughest guys in town are there. It's like he's there for breakfast, but all the toughest guys are there. You know, I can only assume that they've carried on drinking from the night before, and they're like, come on, fellas, let's go play pool at the local diner at 9 a.m. in the morning.
None of them seem to want a shirt either, do you know what I mean?
They hate
We're
shirts.
all sleeveless, like...
Yeah, they're just like, we're not dealing with that. But again, I know Jean-Claude Van Damme isn't huge, but you see him, he's obviously a bit weird, and he is absolutely shredded. And immediately, whatever his name was, old Hank from behind, you know, in the kitchen, like Hank's going to put a beating on him, like, I'm going to teach you a lesson. It's like, dude, do you not think that maybe this guy can handle himself? And of course, he has a fight with the entire diner. The only diner in the world where at 11 a.m. everybody's more than willing to fight the super shredded Jean-Claude Van Damme.
You want to call unrealistic, right? Hank coming out from that diner with not one drop of sweat on him. Apparently, he's slaving all day over all that, what did he call it? Slop, right? Yeah. He's a big dude, seems to have a bandana on. He's got his apron on, things like that. He should have come out wet as fuck. I'm sorry. Do you know what I mean?
That's such an odd way to put it. Like, you can't. It's like, dude, you're not very wet. Like, if you go and play football, go, oh my god, I'm just wet. Like, oh. If then, I think people would like mark you, like probably stop marking you quite so tightly. If someone just looked at me and go, man, I'm wet. I was like, oh, I'm wet as fuck. I'm like, oh, I'm not sure I want to mark this guy.
A river should have been flowing down his ass crack.
Yeah, if he's made all that food in Arizona in, let's be clear, what is apparently the 1950s. Because this place is so lost in time. The only thing that's compared, and again, my attempt to bring up Tom Cruise on every single podcast. In Top Gun Maverick, there's a moment when his plane goes down at the start of the film, and he lands apparently in 1950s America. Like, he lands, you know, it's very similar to this film, a diner, which I have to assume does doesn't really exist anymore. No mobile phones. Everyone's wearing like their plaid like tops and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The tough guys are all in the diner, and it's like, how did I end up landing in the 1950s? Apparently, that's what the entirety of Arizona looks like. Not only that, but they end up driving like 1950s cars in this film.
When they steal the cars from Jim or whatever his name is, it's nothing but 1950s era cars.
Yeah, like you said, all around his bizarro gas station, where they go in to use the toilet, and apparently it's also his living room. It's really strange. But his petrol station or gas station, whatever you want to call it, it literally has 10 cars there, and every single one is from the 1950s. But there is no sign of modern day reality going on anywhere in Louisiana. You see a little bit more as they move in towards Utah. But most of this film, it's either set, like it's supposed to be, quote unquote, modern day. So, 1992. Half the film looks like it was set in 1950s. Whereas the Universal Soldiers, or Unisols, which is a name I never really took to, they look like they came from 2047. And it makes for a bizarre film in many respects.
The Universal Soldier, Unisol, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if that's where the owner of Yodel come up with his name.
Oh, like the etymology of Yodel comes from that. Yeah, maybe.
Well, because Yodel actually stands for your delivery, and they just put it together, and you had Yodel. So I'm wondering if one day he just sat there watching Universal Soldier, and he went, Unisol, that's it.
That's it. We can do that? Well, They did it in the film. Why can't we? We'll just go from here, I suppose. But you mentioned
1950s, sorry. The motel, that was pure 1950s as well.
Everything about it, every single scene, other than like the really cool truck and its soldiers, and the truck was cool, in fairness. Like, again, didn't look like a 90s truck, looked like a kind of, it reminded me of something, and again, this is very much for 80s kids, it reminded me of something from like Mask. Remember the old cartoon? It totally looked like I can imagine if somebody bought me that truck as a kid, where it opens up and you have like the toy Universal Soldiers in there and all that. I would have absolutely loved that as a kid.
Here's a test for you. What does Mask stand for?
Oh, dude, I remember it because I know the K should be a C.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I remember. God, you have to tell me.
Mobile Armor Strike Command.
Yeah, command. That was it. Command with a K.
Command with a K, apparently.
That's what Mortal Kombat stole it from.
Yeah.
Dirty beggars.
Everyone's stealing something from everyone else today. Right? When I was doing my, I say research in quotes about this film, I found the guy who owned the diner, I found his real name, or his stage name. His name is Robert Trebor.
Okay.
Trebor is Robert backwards.
Oh my God.
So he chose basically Robert.
Yeah. Jesus Christ.
How can I stand out from the crowd? But I'm not very clever. I know, I'll just do my name backwards. Robert Trebor.
Oh my God. I bet you referred to himself as Dick Trebor as well. Like, like one of those fucking guys.
Yeah.
Jesus wept. Yeah, that's got to be one of the worst names of all time.
I know. I mean, it's not
like calling myself Liam Mail. It's just like, what the fuck?
It's not very imaginative, is it?
No, well, I don't know. Is it not very? Is it super imaginative? Because he might be the only person whose full name is his first name followed by his first name backwards.
Accidentally saw his name in the mirror and just went, "That'll do."
That'll do. That's it. It's like, he was hungover. He's like, dude, they're going to ask you for your stage name. And he's just like, oh yeah, kind of like, Red Rum and Murder. Yeah. Only like the comedic version of that, basically.
Robert Trebor.
Yeah, well, like when I signed up for Xbox Live years and years ago, obviously, and I was all super excited because I had like Project Gotham Racing 3 and Ghost Recon to play on my shiny new Xbox 360. And you had to pick a name as your like game attack. And at the time, Ron Burgundy was like really popular with what's the movie? Jesus Christ, I can't think. Anchorman. Thank you very much.
Let me guess, you went with Sex Panther.
Well, no, I went with Papa Burgundy.
Okay.
But I was so excited that I spelt Burgundy wrong. So for like the past 15 years, my tag has been Papa Bugandi. Because I was a complete pleb. And of course, it was just like in that moment, I was all super excited, and then it's just been stuck. I've been stuck with this goddamn, user tag for the past 15 years. Only imagine that with your actual name. Like he was clearly hungover or too excited. He went, I'm going with Robert ostensibly.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's the rest of his life. So, I mean, it's a shame he wasn't a bigger star, but at least he's had his moments. I'm sure when he picked it, he didn't think idiots like us would be talking about it on a podcast in 2022. But here we are.
Yeah, literally, 30 years later, you got two idiots now just going, oh yeah, Robert Treble, ha ha ha.
Oh my goodness, my goodness. I mean, you mentioned at the top of the podcast that this is ostensibly a zombie movie.
That's what I was going to ask you, because people have actually classed it as like cyborg film, but it's a zombie film, isn't it?
It's 100% a zombie film. I mean, there was like, there's been a lot of plagiarism claims, like initially when this was released about like, basically being, Terminator ripoff in many respects. And it has a lot of nods to basically this movie handpicked a lot of what was popular at the time. There's a little bit of RoboCop, which kind of is also a zombie movie if you break it down. Plenty of Terminator. There's a bit of Predator in the scene when they just needlessly, let's be clear, like these Unisols, they're not very well trained. Like when they show up at the motel and they just unload 1,000 shells into that place rather than maybe knocking on the door or trying to go in through a window. They go, if that's not a very literal nod to the scene in Predator when they just shoot at the entire jungle, I don't know what is. But yeah, it is really, it's two things. It's basically an amalgamation of all your favorite 80s action films, and it's a zombie film. It even has the old woman from Running Man. When she's like, I pick Reed Richards, that old lady.
He's one mean motherfucker.
He's one mean motherfucker. Yeah, she's in this, and I'm like, that can't be an accident. But yeah.
She was the motel owner's mum. Of course she was.
Yeah. Yeah, so she makes an
security
appearance.
Deposit, eh?
It is weird because it is, they are zombies slowly being brought back to life. Only this movie has no interest in really dealing with the kind of like, the concept of what they, there are like little nods to them, obviously like refinding their lives in the same way that RoboCop does. But everything is like purely surface level, especially with Dolph Lundgren's character. It is just an excuse for him to fight Jean-Claude Van Damme. And that is it. And the rest of it is just a chase movie.
Why just those two as well? Why did they get to relive their past lives?
Mm-hmm.
Because Lundgren seemed to just click to it straight away. Like he had all these sly little nods about the fact he's looking at Van Damme and he's like, oh yeah. And right at the beginning, when Van Damme turned around to Lundgren and just started staring at him after seeing the Asian tourists on the floor crying. Yeah, so Lundgren just straight away was like, well, I'm mean to start with. But none of the others seem to relive their past lives.
No, I was thinking maybe because their deaths were so intertwined, which, let's be honest, like they really should have planned for. Like they're like, maybe don't have these guys, they died in the same place. So if there's any chance of them kind of reliving their memories or anything kind of setting them off. And it just seemed to be that obviously there was like that trigger for Jean-Claude's character was seeing those two characters. And because he got triggered, it was like, obviously that moment was linked to both of their deaths. And that's what set off Dolph Lundgren's character as well, or Andrew Scott, the ridiculously named Andrew Scott. And yeah, I'm trying to justify why that might have happened or why it only happened to those two. And the real reason is because we're only interested in those two because they're the stars. Like it's just, it doesn't work for the narrative for them all to start remembering. Because like you said, what happens if what happens if he died in the bedroom? If he just died horny? We don't want to have to deal with Tiny Lister going around trying to fuck everything. We don't want that movie.
That's a big man trying to fuck everything.
That is a very big man. He has a relatively small part in this film, but you notice it when they're like they're getting their like freezer fluid, whatever you want to call it, and they're all shredded, of course. It's like Jean-Claude Van Damme is absolutely jacked, same with Dolph Lundgren, but you see Tiny Lister laying there and he is absolutely ginormous. And I was like, it was 1992, so this was around the same time as, I guess, No Holds Barred and him playing Zeus in the wrestling.
That was 1989, wasn't it, No Holds Barred? So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that led to his wrestling run, which only lasted for a few years. But I wonder if he was still in wrestling shape. Because there is jacked movie shape. And then there is, I need to, like, stand next to wrestlers. And, of course, his whole thing was that he was bigger and more imposing than Hulk Hogan. Like, that was one of his things. And as big as these guys are, if you see a normal person standing next to like a heavyweight wrestler, that's when you really get the scale of these guys. Because, of course, they're all giants, but 99% of the time, they're standing next to other giants. But I think we talked about it in the They Live podcast. Like, when I grew up, I always thought of Roddy Piper as being a kind of mid-range, in terms of pure size now. Yeah. He was like, we're talking kind of peak steroid era. So he was standing next to the Ultimate Warrior. He was standing next to Hulk Hogan, these absolute ginormous men. So I was like, Roddy Piper was more just a dude.
He was
and
like
then you see him take off his top next to a normal human being and they live. And you're like, God damn it, man. Roddy Piper was shredded as fuck. He wasn't shredded. He was ginormous. He was fucking ginormous. Yeah. So yeah, it's the same with I think Tiny Lister. You see him laying there, and his chest is nearly as long as his. It's just he's ridiculous.
Oh, he's massive. Did you notice the other GR as well? I'm gonna guess you probably didn't. It's probably only me that noticed this.
Is it Jai White?
So Jai White is in it as one of the soldiers.
He was one of the soldiers. Yeah. That was it.
And obviously, then he had a bigger role in one of the Universal Soldiers. And we'll get to the sequels made for TV. And
that's your section. You are covering Legacy this week, sir. That's for sure.
The other one, right, is a guy named Philip Ree. I think it's Philip Ree, or is it Simon Ree? Anyway, I only noticed it, and I was like, I'm sure I know that guy. If I put an eye patch on him, I'm sure I know him. He's
what an odd thing to say. It's like, if I put an eye patch, I'll definitely know that guy.
Oh, but put an eye patch on him, you'll recognize him.
Okay.
He's the South Korean leader, the South Korean leader.
Oh, from Best of the Best.
Best of the Best.
Yeah.
Put an eye patch on him, you notice straight away.
Yeah, as soon as you mentioned eye patch, I was like, I think I know where this is going. Yeah.
He is, and he's he's the brother of Jimmy Lee, the American side. So the actual brothers in real life. But I was doing a deep dive on him then via IMDb. My God, that guy's still busy. He has been doing stunts since the fucking 80s. And he is. I
mean, that's also the main thing I'm going to take from this is that we should really do Best of the Best soon. Because that was legitimately one of my favorite martial arts films of the 80s. Because obviously, watching this film, you can't escape, the legacy of Jean-Claude Van Damme, which, he, like I said, this film made him a massive star, and it led to films like, Double Impact and Hard Target, Street Fighter, which is seen as a flop and stuff, but that film still made 100 million back.
I was only 2 years away from this film as well, by the way.
What's that, sorry?
I was only 2 years away from this film.
I know, but that was the thing, though. But he had that really intense part of his career from I don't know, I guess there was 88 to this film. So it was films like, as I said, Bloodsport and Kickboxer. And that's where my attachment to Jean-Claude Van Damme was him as a martial artist. And obviously those films have all turned into cult favorites, but they weren't massive hits. They were more cult hits. But it was this that led to those films, like I said, like Sudden Death, like Time Cop, which was a massive hit. Those films, it was up until 1995. So 91 to 95, they were really pushing him as the new action star. And it never quite worked in the same way as Schwarzenegger and stuff.
When did he do that film with Dennis Rodman? That kind of ended his career.
That would have been around 95, 96, I suppose.
Yeah, double Team, I think it was called, where they were trying
because there were a few doubles, weren't there? There was Double Impact, where he was playing himself. He was playing against himself. And then there was the other one, which I can't remember.
I think it's Double Team. Where he teams up.
They all sound like porn parodies of themselves, don't they?
He teams up with Dennis Rodman to take on Mickey Rourke.
Yeah, well, this is the kind of world we were living in, when they were trying to force these odd characters into action films, and this was all the way through to the early 2000s, when it was remember, it was Jet Li would be playing alongside DMX and shit like that. You would get these weird combo. We talk about this being this crossover film where you get Jean-Claude Van Damme fighting Dolph Lundgren, but that kind of style. Obviously, there were the aforementioned the big ones. Like we said, Face Off, Demolition Man stuff. But there were a bunch of low key ones. I can't remember what the film was where Jet Li fought DMX or fought alongside him. But they would try. Of course, you knew that film. In fairness, it did have a famous soundtrack, didn't it? I think. Yeah. But yeah, what was Dennis Rodman doing in a movie? In what world was that a good goddamn idea?
Watching this film, I fell down an internal rabbit hole in my mind, right? Because I watched this film and it made me go to Double Team with Dennis Rodman, where they team up to take on Mickey Rourke. I then thought about this obscure film called Point Blank that was released, I think, in 1998.
I know the one.
You know it?
Yeah, I know it. Yeah.
Where he goes, when Mickey Rourke goes into a mall to rescue his brother. Oh, not that obscure then. I thought.
No, it is. Make no mistake, it's obscure. Yeah. I'm just be clear. So many of the films that you talk about, I'm aware of them quite often, but I haven't watched them. And that is the difference between you and I. I'm aware of these obscure films, but you've sat down and go, I'm going to watch 98 minutes of Mickey Rourke in a mall. 100%. I'm totally going to do this.
Who says 3 words throughout that film.
Amazing.
But I love it, right? The reason why I wanted to bring it up because his character in that film, in Point Blank, is named Rudy Ray.
My God, this is the podcast of just ridiculous movie names, either whether it be the actor themselves or the character.
Rudy Ray.
But yeah, speaking of the fact that he only says 3 words, at least he keeps the numbers down because, again, this is the era. And sorry, excuse me. It's bizarre when you look back at like the late 80s or mid 80s right through to the early 90s, where like they just kind of kept finding these oh my God, the irony of what just happened, I appreciate. These actors who no one can understand. They're supposed to be these kind of like big US heroes kind of thing. This is, again, the Reagan era. And none of them can speak English clearly. It's like, Stallone, I guess he was American, but he had borderline a speech impediment. Schwarzenegger, Dolph Lundgren, Jean-Claude Van Damme. What was up with making all these guys with bizarre accents, action heroes? None of them sounded American. Like the closest thing to it was Chuck Norris, and no one gave a shit. And even, what's his name? Steven Seagal. He had a bizarre accent as well. And I guess that brings me to my next point, was like, where do you think, like looking back, Jean-Claude Van Damme sits in the kind of hierarchy of like great action stars? Because obviously
overall
at the top,
or of an era?
Of that era, because I know you can. I don't want to kind of get into the weeds of like more recent action stars. I'm very much talking about the golden years of like the 80s and the early 90s. And it was like for a while there, he was knocking on the door, I think, Jean-Claude Van Damme. But immediately when I think, okay, well, you've got Schwarzenegger and Stallone at the top. And then below it, I was like, do you go immediately to like Jean-Claude Van Damme and Steven Seagal? And I was like, then I was like, well, no, Jean-Claude Van Damme deserves his own category because surely he was a bigger star than Steven Seagal. But then, of course, I started thinking about films like Hard to Kill and Under Siege. And I was like, no, Steven Seagal, similar to Jean-Claude Van Damme, had a little period where he was a legitimately big star, only to go out of his fucking mind and kind of ruin it for himself.
If you do like a top 5, you are right. You can't make the first 2. They can interchange, but
I think it's Schwarzenegger and
Stallone. Mm-hmm. It's Bruce Willis. You got Van Damme in there as well, and I would probably put Seagal over Lundgren.
100%, 100%. Because as I said,
nobody else from that era of the 80s that I would think a memorable action films.
No, there's other ones like the aforementioned Chuck Norris and stuff like that. But I think they are the kind of the top 5. And I was like, out of those, the only one you would question is like Bruce Willis, because he never quite fit the mold in quite the same way. Obviously, a big part of this was because of like Die Hard and stuff like that.
So if he fell into Die Hard, he just hit action film after action film for a while then.
Yeah. I think maybe it's just because he's clearly the best actor of the bunch. Like, when he decided to commit to a role, and you see it in movies like The Sixth Sense and 12.
Last Boy Scouts.
Well, that's an action film, but he's great in that film. But, I was thinking like 12 Monkeys, where that is a legitimately, if somebody said he was to get an Oscar, I'm not saying to win the Oscar, but if he had got an Oscar nomination for something like the 12 Monkeys, I don't think that would have been outlandish. I think he was, in those films, when Bruce Willis was, because I think he always had the issue was like, did he care enough? Because when he did put his foot down and like, all right, I'm committed to this role, he was unquestionably, of those 5, he's leagues ahead of the others, like no doubt. And this comes from a person who thinks Stallone has a great performance in him. I think he should have won Best Supporting Actor for Creed, for instance. Yeah. I think he was robbed for that. But I think generally speaking, he is the best of the bunch. Although now I'm like, he's great in Copland. Right?
You want to go acting? At the same year Universal Soldier was released, you're saying Bruce Willis was the best actor of the bunch. Mm-hmm. The same year Universal Soldier was released, I'm pretty sure it was 91, we had the fantastic Hudson Hawk.
The fantastic Hudson Hawk. I'm not sure those are words that have ever gone together, but sure, why not?
I loved Hudson Hawk.
Of course you did. You know that film's terrible, right?
Yes, awful.
It's an awful film. But no, he was in terrible films, and I think he fell into the same trap as basically all these guys did, where they were so famous and had so much smoke blown up their ass or cocaine blown up their nose. Jean-Claude Van Damme was as guilty as anyone of getting on the Charlie. So, of course, they all turned into psychos, absolute psychos. So it's this really bizarre moment in Hollywood where you've got these massive egos, but you've got a studio system willing to support and grow those egos by giving them everything they wanted, because this is back in the time when, stars drove the movie business. Hard Target didn't get made because it was called Hard Target. It got made because they got Jean-Claude Van Damme in the lead role. And they were pushing him as the next big thing. And as I said, for a few years, like Steven Seagal, they had their, couple of years in the sun when you're like, this movie made over 100 million. Time Cop was a big hit. And as I said, Street Fighter, which they were obviously trying to make this franchise, didn't work out. It still made okay-ish money. It wasn't
Raul Julia enjoyed that film.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was the only one who knew what movie he was in. He was chewing the scenery.
He was doing it for a paycheck. He was. And obviously he was at a very specific part of his life, at the end of it, as it were, which is very sad, obviously. But he did give the most memorable performance in a bizarre film. But again, we talked about this film where they keep making these like European actors, like, quintessential American soldiers. That's never truer than in Street Fighter. He plays Guile. Guile is supposed to be the most American of all the soldiers. With an American flag tattoo.
Belgian.
He's got an American flag tattoo in that game.
And he's got like the most ridiculous accent in the world. I love Jean-Claude Van Damme, but it's just again, it speaks to the nature. And, it's something we mentioned a lot in our early podcast, the impact of cocaine on every decision that was made in Hollywood in these times. And that's never more prevalent than on, like, they didn't care about the fact that Jean-Claude Van Damme could hardly speak English. They're like, look at those kicks he can do. Look how great he looks naked. Let's just get him on screen. And that is the other thing. You always get the obligatory Jean-Claude Van Damme butt scene. As this film,
the butt scene, but they did miss a trick because they didn't give him his splits in this film.
The closest they gave him was he does a kick right at the end with the fight with Andrew Scott, and it's almost a split kick. But I think it would have been. I think they got the balance right, because at the start of the film, the whole idea is he's not Jean-Claude Van Damme as we know him. He's not a kickboxer. He's just an American soldier with a weird ass accent. So when he becomes a Unisol, it doesn't make sense that he would magically know martial arts. If he knows martial arts, that means all of them should know martial arts, It's like, unless they've got like a Matrix style program where they just kind of, type it into their brains and suddenly it's like, Kung Fu.
Well, they did have 23, 24 years, because apparently they all died in 1969. Mm-hmm. And then this is 1992. Yeah. So they had a lot of time. A couple of things I want to mention, right? The fact that it took them forever to get this program up and running, for this program to go off the rails very, very quickly.
It really did. Yeah. It really did.
And
I mean, I'm not going to lie. I know you've moved on, but my head is still on the fact that Jean-Claude Van Damme, while totally naked, was just bizarrely wearing socks. And I can't get that image out of my head.
I haven't moved on from that scene because I got something to mention about this.
Okay, cool. Sorry.
Look for something hard made me laugh.
Yeah. I mean, it's so childish, but it's a good scene.
But that scene, this is what I want to say, because apparently these soldiers are completely unkillable unless you warm them up. Like I said, you give them a tan.
Yeah. And why would all of their missions be in Arizona, like the hottest place on earth? Yeah. It makes no sense.
She knows they're unkillable, right? Yeah, she's hitting him with a stack of papers. She's hitting Andrew Scott with a stack of papers. Like, she's seen these guys survive bullet wounds. Mm-hmm. And she's hitting him with a stack of papers.
And when we say she, we are talking about Ali Walker, who, as Veronica Roberts, and again, another nod to, Anchorman. Like, whenever I hear Veronica Roberts, I just think of Veronica Corningstone from that film. But she is one of the most 90s things ever committed to the screen. She's 90s in the way that Losing My Religion by R.E.M. is 90s. She's like aggressively 90s. It's just like, there's no reason for her to be smoking so much in this film, but I enjoy it. The fact that she looks like an amalgamation of famous 90s actresses, like she looks like a combination, like she looks like Meg Ryan, Jennifer Aniston, Bridget Fonda, all combined to have some kind of super baby, super 90s female lead baby. And it's even with like her voice just sounds like a 90s voice. I think they were just into husky female leads for a few years there. But yeah, I mean, I think Ali Walker's great in this film, but we just never really saw her again. I know she's, she's been busy since, and she has been in quite a few. Like, I think she was on like Sons of Anarchy, which
that's it for me. She hit it. She came back in Sons of Anarchy, and then when I saw her in Sons of Anarchy, because I'm a big fan of that show,
you were like, "Is that the woman from Kazam?" I think it's the woman from Kazam.
Jesus Christ, that's Veronica from Universal Soldier. Which, sorry to say, back the husky thing and everything, I did have a crush on her.
No, I never had a crush on her. This isn't one of my late 80s, early 90s crushes. It was just I don't know. It didn't have. She was just like this female leader. Maybe it was because she was only in this film, or at least as far as my simple mind was concerned.
Yeah,
I can't remember her. Like I said, I'm aware that she was in other things. But when I'm even rewatching it, I was like, I couldn't name another thing that she was in until I'd done the research. And to be honest, I've seen Kazam, and I'd obviously blocked that entire movie from my memory.
Kazam is the Shaquille O'Neal genie film.
Where, he's playing a genie.
I mean, to be fair, I've never seen it. But after watching Steel, I'm pretty sure I've reached my quota of Shaquille O'Neal films.
Yeah, Shaquille, and again, this kind of comes back to this whole idea of like forcing sports stars into movie roles. And did it all start with Michael Jordan in Space Jam? Because that was like 95, 96?
93, Space Jam.
Was it that early?
I believe so.
Jesus Christ, that is depressing. But yeah, it's one of those things that kind of, Space Jam was a hit, so now we're just going to keep throwing basketball players at the wall and see what happens. And I guess Shaq made sense because he's so big.
You were right. I was wrong. 96.
96, yeah. I thought it was. Well, because it would have been in the middle of their like second three-peat, I think. Yeah. The Bulls, that is. So it was after he had been to, he'd played baseball, minor league baseball with the Sox.
No, you had a lot of American football stars joining films in the 80s, don't you?
O.J. Simpson.
O.J. But batteries.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's easy to forget. O.J. Simpson was like the most famous sportsman in America for quite a period, and that's all just being forgotten because he probably killed that poor woman. So
yeah. Batteries Not Included. We've mentioned it before. I forget his name now already. He was the boxer in Batteries Not Included. He was the angry lieutenant in 48 Hours. What the Frank McRae. Frank McRae. Yeah. He was a professional football player for a while, wasn't he? So
yeah, well, there are a whole bunch who have crossed over, and I guess why not? The thing is, I guess historically, you think of like wrestlers who have crossed over, and obviously they made a big push for like Hulk Hogan, for instance. And sometimes it's easy to forget that the biggest movie star in the world was formerly the biggest wrestler in the world with The Rock.
Yeah.
But they lend themselves better. The same with footballers because they're big and they look like traditional 80s action heroes. The problem with basketballers is that they're all just weird, gangly giants for the most part. Even if they are cut, unless they're really ginormous in the way that Shaq was, because he was 7 foot, 7'1", 7'2", but he didn't look gangly in the way that most basketball players did because he weighed 350 pounds. Like he is a giant in every sense of the word.
That was a lot of metal you'd have to put on Shaq in that film still. That's a lot of metal.
Well, the thing is, you see it like when Dennis Rodman was on screen, he just looked tall and awkward. And it was the same. I remember, of all people, Karl Malone was at like WrestleMania something or another. And Karl Malone used to play basketball for the Utah Jazz back in the 90s, the team who almost made it a whole bunch of time, but were always stopped by Michael Jordan and the Bulls. And he was obviously in amazing shape, totally shredded, but he was like 6'9". And of course, he just looked weird and gangly standing next to wrestlers who were also 6'8", 6'9", but were giants of human beings. And they just lend themselves better to the screen, I think. But
you want to talk about sports stars crossing over to movies. Have you seen the Roadhouse remake?
I'm aware of it, yes.
Yeah. So they have Jake Gyllenhaal coming over as Dalton.
Which isn't bad.
Now they've signed to have a major part in the film, actually starring opposite Jake Gyllenhaal, Conor McGregor.
I mean, the thing is, because he's so good at talking and he's got so much charisma, and when I think of like a Roadhouse movie, you can imagine him being a horrible kind of like working on the door. It's like, yeah, he wouldn't look out of place. So perhaps, Conor McGregor will work. And that's another thing, whether it be let's be clear, UFC is as close to wrestling as it is to boxing, in so much that such a big part of it is cutting promos ostensibly, and that's why they work on screen, because these guys are basically acting all the time, and that's what Conor McGregor's doing. He's a psycho, sure, but he's acting all the time.
Can he do a script? Can he read from a script? Can he deliver lines?
Well, that's the thing. We will find out.
Give him the Sam Elliott role.
Well, that is the thing. Like, do you want an emotional impact? And you're almost like, can you do it a bit more off the cuff? Like, how strict are you going to be with the line readings? Or are you just going to let Conor McGregor be Conor McGregor? Because sometimes you say, like, how many wrestlers have tried to cross over and it's not worked? But then other ones, like, straight off the bat, there was no kind of like bedding in period. As soon as you saw, and I think the movie had a different name in America, but over here it was called Welcome to the Jungle.
The Rundown.
The run with The Rock.
Rundown in America.
Yeah. Which is a surprisingly good film. Christopher Walken's in it. I was going to say Billy Zane. It's not Billy Zane.
Sean William Scott.
Sean William Scott. Yeah. I was thinking of the other.
I always look at Sean William Scott and go, well, you know what? He looks like Billy Zane.
No, not Billy Zane. There's another guy called Zane something or another who was a pretty big hit, pretty big actor for a few years in like the 90s and stuff.
Zane.
Oh my God, I'm not going to remember his name. I'll have to look it up. But as soon as The Rock showed up, he was like a ready-made movie star. In the same way, I think we mentioned, I know this has nothing to do with wrestling, but when Eddie Murphy came across from stand-up comedy and Saturday Night Live, there was no period when you had awkward Eddie Murphy on screen. He showed up a ready-made movie star. The Rock showed up a ready-made movie star. You could say the same thing about John Cena. John Cena just showed up and he was just like, holy shit. I had no idea. But the point is, you don't know until you see it. Like, if someone had said to me 15, 20 years ago, it's like John Cena is going to become a movie star, you're like, man, is that going to work? Yeah, it totally fucking works. He's great on screen. But and maybe we'll get the same with Conor McGregor. But of course, there's so many question marks around Roadhouse, because we did the podcast recently, and I'm not sure either of us ever thought that a remake of Roadhouse was a good idea.
No, not at all. Although I do like the fact that on the Universal Soldier podcast, we have drifted on the biggest fucking tangents, I think.
We've gone on so many tangents. So I will bring it back to the movie, and more specifically the director, Roland Emmerich.
Literally, my next line was, who directed this film? Like, can you believe who directed this film?
This is why this podcast works so well. We've said it before, we're either totally on the same page or we're watching The Sandlot Kids. It's one of those two.
Anything with kid in it at the moment, because Karate Kid,
Sandlot Kids, we totally disagree. So if you've kind of listened to a lot of our podcasts, you will realize, I would say like a good 85 to 90% of the time, Rob and I are absolutely on the same page. But when we disagree to a spectacular degree.
There's no middle ground, is there?
There is zero middle ground. It's either we totally agree or it's Tom fucking Cruise. It's one of those two. But
when you were going on the list of action stars, I was going to say Tom Cruise is not a fucking action star.
He is not an action. He's a movie star. He's a movie star, not an action star. Despite his place, he's turned himself into that. We're not going to get into this.
Moving on to the director.
Roland Emmerich, who's had such a weird career, and this would be a real test of Rob's credentials for obscure movies back in the 80s, because before Universal Soldier, which for me put him on the map, I didn't know anything about his list, his IMDb. Like, he did The Noah's Ark Principle in 84, Making Contact in 85, Ghost Chase in 87, which looked like a film you might have seen, admittedly.
I've seen Ghost Chase.
Of course you are. Honestly, I said it to Bethan. I was going through the list. I was like, what the fuck is Ghost Chase? I was like, I bet Rob's seen Ghost Chase.
It had a different name, and I don't remember much about it, but I remember for some reason they haunted a grandfather clock.
Of course they did.
And but this was his first American production, wasn't it, Universal Soldier?
Yeah, well, I think the film that put him on the map was Moon 44. Yeah. That was the film that kind of ostensibly got him this role. But he was supposed to be making a Sylvester Stallone movie, which didn't work out. And he was given the script at the time, and apologies, I will be stepping on facts slightly here, was for a movie called Crystal Knights. And basically, they liked the concept, but they were like, the script was terrible. So he and his scriptwriter, he's worked with Dean something or another. I've got his name off the top of my head.
Dean Devlin.
Dean Devlin, that's it. I'm so glad, because I wrote down Dean Devlin, but it did autocorrect. So I'm looking at it and I'm like, his name definitely isn't Dean Declines. That's not his name. Don't read. I almost had we keep coming back to Anchorman. I almost had a Ron Burgundy moment where I'm just going to read anything in front of me. Oh, his scriptwriter, Dean Declines.
Dean Devlin likes writing Well, he's done a lot of TV shows. He did like Leverage. He's done other things, but he wrote, if I remember rightly, quite a few of the World's Gonna End films.
Yeah, he worked with him on a lot of those. So
and he actually directed that one with Gerard Butler about Geostorm.
Oh yeah, where he punches a storm or whatever.
Yeah, he directed that to the point where the studio hated this and brought in another director. Poor Dean Devlin was just gone.
Oh, and I don't think it's safe. I have a bit of a soft spot for Geostorm because it's so ludicrous. In the same way that I was a big fan, I was a big Roland Emmerich fan for a few years, and a big part of that was his second phase. So the phase that started with Universal Soldier, and it was before, because obviously Independence Day, it basically created this monster where he's the guy who blows up the world. And it became the emphasis for so many of his films. But for a long time, and obviously this speaks to the earlier part of his career, but when he was given money for Universal Soldier, Stargate in 95, and Independence Day, obviously most famously in 96, he was the one who made big budget, high concept sci-fi films, but made them popcorn movies.
Yeah.
Like, if you look at Universal Soldier, there is some like pretty heady ideas here about PTSD, about, basically these soldier zombies coming back to life and, their connection to their real world selves and all these other things. But he's basically ignoring most of that and turning it into a really propulsive popcorn movie. And it's the same with Stargate. Stargate's got so many great big ideas, but it never comes at the cost of it becoming this really entertaining movie. And another film we'll be doing on this podcast, I adore Stargate. I think it's an absolutely fantastic.
I do like Stargate.
Independence Day, I think, in terms of like a 3-movie run, Universal Soldier, Stargate, and then Independence Day, absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, and then Godzilla, mind after.
And then, that's why it stopped in 96. So I've got the third phase of his career as the what went wrong section of the podcast. And, there are some hits in here. I mean, Godzilla was still a hit, but it's not a good film. The Patriot in 2000, big hit, don't like it. Day After Tomorrow, massive hit, kind of dumb. Anonymous was that really weird, back in the days when directors had enough power to do like one for them and one for me.
Was that William Shakespeare thing?
Yeah, with Bruce Evans in it. Yeah. So, and it still somehow looked like it cost £100 million to make, despite the fact that it was about Shakespeare. Well, not about Shakespeare, about the guy who supposedly wrote all his plays in his place. He did 2012, which I also saw. 10,000 BC for my sins, saw that. White House Down, terrible film, saw that. And that's where I finally gave up. I didn't watch Midway, and I haven't seen Moonfall. But White House Down was the straw that broke the camel's back, because that was in the Deep Impact versus Armageddon.
In the diehards in a White House films that were released that year, I kind of preferred White House Down over.
I'm amazed to hear that. Over Gerard Butler in
Gerard Butler's one, Olympus Has Fallen.
Dude, Olympus I had no expectations going to Olympus Has Fallen. And I think because it came relatively soon off the back of The Expendables, and we mentioned it earlier, The Expendables on paper should have been our dream movie. It's taken all the stuff we loved from the 80s and combined it. But what they didn't get right was the tone. And I've talked about it with action movies. I've talked about it with John Hughes films. The reason you can't remake these films is because you can't, like, everything has to be done with a wink nowadays. This knowing smile, like, we know this is ridiculous. We know this is naive. We know this is too saccharine. Whereas Olympus Has Fallen ignored that. It legitimately made an 80s action film starring Gerard Butler. He delivers so many stupid lines with no wink at the camera whatsoever. I was like, that is, in terms of like recent-ish films, that film has come the closest, I think, to truly recapturing that sense of 80s action cinema. And for that reason, I absolutely adored it. And it was the same reason that I really didn't like White House Down.
I do like Olympus Has Fallen. I think it's a good film. For some reason, I kind of preferred White House Down.
Okay, fair enough.
I am a fan, even though he was a terrible John Connor. I am a fan of the bad guy in White House Down. I can never remember his name now.
Jason. From Terminator 3?
No, from Terminator.
Oh, no, from Terminator Genesis. Yeah, he's great because he's great in everything he's been in. Pet Sematary, the remake, he was fantastic in that.
Clark.
Yeah, he's great in. Was it the second of the Planet of the Apes movies? I think he was in that one, which is the best one by far. I won't try and get the name right.
I haven't seen the two that are good because the James Franco one kind of ruined it for me.
Well, I had the issue, and I think I've mentioned it before, that after the first movie, my wife just said she was over apes. I was like, what do you mean you're over apes? So obviously she had the same reaction to you to the first movie, which I think we did mention this again on a previous podcast, that you really should watch the second and the third films because they're so much better.
And I will get round to it at some point.
The second one in particular, in which he's one of the major stars of the film, is a legitimately top-tier action movie. Or, Planet of the Apes movie. It was arguably one of the better kind of mainstream movies of the decade. I'm not saying like top of the list, but it's in that kind of category. And the third one has problems, despite the fact that it's still a very good film. But I can understand why you would stop after the first one. But I'm going on another tangent here.
When you look, I was trying to bring it back then. When you look at Roland Emmerich, you still can't believe that he directed Universal Soldier.
Like, it doesn't feel like a.
It doesn't fit. But as you say, if you look at the films before that, and you've got like Moon 44 and Ghost Chaser and things like, then you think, okay, that guy did Universal Soldier.
Well, the big thing that actually gives away that this is a Roland Emmerich film are the opening credits. They're almost exactly the same as the Independence Day credits. Like they're like overly dramatic. Like where the only difference is, I think we mentioned the Independence Day credits. They explode because everything in that movie explodes, including the credits. These credits don't explode. There's a little bit more restraint, and I think the reason that this film works so well in many respects, in the same way with Stargate and maybe Independence Day to a certain extent, is an element of restraint. It was before he was ostensibly given like a battle chest, where they just said, "Oh, here's a blank check. Make what you want." And we see it the same with like Michael Bay. Michael Bay, I don't think is necessarily a great director. He's a great action director, but a lot of his best films are when he was working on a budget, and they weren't just like go crazy. There's no one there to say no. Same with George Lucas. His best work is when there was obviously someone there saying, "Hey, George, maybe we should take another look at this script," for instance. Yeah. And some directors just go off the rails when they're given all the money in the world. And I think that is to an extent what happened with Roland Emmerich. There were some good films towards the latter half of his career, but this period when he clearly would have been still working within the limitations, they wouldn't have just given him a blank check. They would have said, "Okay, well, here's some money to make this movie. Do what you can." And this is when this period, that 3-movie stretch, that is him at his best.
How much is the budget of this film? Do you know? Did you write that down?
It was, because it was quite a big hit, because it was like 100 million off like a 30 million budget, or 20, I think it was like 27 million. Okay.
I'm assuming 7 million of that went on ice.
Yeah, it's a lot of fucking ice in this film.
There's a lot of ice. Like, when you go back to Joe or Jim or whoever, and him dressed in Devereaux's Universal Soldier outfit was funny as fuck to me.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. So I do have it written down. It was 23 million budget and went on to make near enough like 100 million, basically.
100 million. Yeah, but when all three of them opened their respective boots to get out of the car, and they're all just covered in ice, and not one of them was like, "My testicles are in my throat right now." I mean, Veronica wouldn't have, but
yeah. Well, that's the thing, though. It comes back to the fact that they just idiotically set this in Arizona. Like they must have known, as you say, it was so poorly planned out, where they're like, "Listen, these guys overheat really, really quickly. How about we do missions kind of like the northern states? How about we send them to New York in the winter? Yeah. How about that? Just not Arizona in the fucking summer, where it's like, it's already 48 degrees outside. It's like within moments. Listen, he's already remembering his past. He's either going to pass out or he's going to kill everyone. One of these two things is going to happen.
But I love as well, right, how they're meant to be like a rapid response team. Like they did a 1.5 miles in 8 minutes swim and stuff like that, right? But it takes about 40 minutes for their mobile command center to open up.
Oh, yeah. in true kind of cartoon fashion, you feel like there should be music playing. Like it does feel like, again, like the intro to Mask, where the truck rocks up and it like slowly opens up and reveals all the compartments, because what they're really doing is selling a toy. And like I said, I would have loved the Universal Soldier truck as a toy. It would have been awesome.
Let's just go Unisol truck.
I hate Unisol. I don't know what it is about.
Right, we've been doing this for nearly an hour. And
I know. And we've hardly talked about the movie. The one thing I will mention, and again, it comes back to that whole, are they 1 foot in the 80s, 1 foot in the 90s thing? And the constant nods to the other action movies. And he was clearly trying to make something that fit alongside those, late 80s, early 90s action movies. Is that going back, I was surprised how violent this movie was. Like, there are moments of levity and stuff, but, growing up, I thought, like, oh, this is just kind of a mid-range action movie. And then you watch it, and there's some real body horror in this movie. Like, some of the deaths are pretty hardcore. I mean, the final fight scene, which basically this is the reason I want to wrap this up before we move on, is not only quite iconic. I really enjoy that last action sequence. It's almost like something out of an anime where they keep getting more and more powered up, like Dragon Ball Z, because they're taking like the shots and stuff, which again isn't something that's explained in the movie until like right at the end. It's like, oh, what's he doing? Oh, he's giving himself more muscles with a needle. Sure. Despite the fact that the finale oddly reminds me again of Cyborg with like the flames and everything kicking off. It's I don't know, like the death scene of Dolph Lundgren in particular, where it's like, I'm not sure if it's a hay chipper or a wood chipper, but all that stuff is full on body horror towards the end of the film. Like when all the spikes go through his hands. So yes, this movie has a somewhat inconsistent tone. I'm not sure if it wants to be a kind of popcorn movie, which obviously Roland Emmerich became famous for, or it wants to be an ultra-violent 80s action movie in the vein of RoboCop and Terminator. I think the biggest issue with this film is that it never quite feels comfortable in either camp, but, it's still fun to watch, that's for sure.
I love it. I love it when Lundgren's pinned against that wood chipper thing you're on about. Mm-hmm. And then for the last scare, obviously he jumps up, he grabs Van Damme's head, he's pulling him closer, and he's doing kissy face.
Oh, he really is. I never noticed that before. I was like, is he trying to kill him or kiss him?
Yeah, he's just doing kissy face. He's just...
The one last thing I'll mention about that final sequence, because obviously this all happens in Louisiana because Jean-Claude Van Damme's character, Luke Devereaux, is trying to find his parents. And I was like, are they still alive? And I was like, well, in 1990, we go on the basis that they were born in 1920. Yes, it actually makes sense. But his parents legitimately look like the painting American Gothic. It's ridiculous what his parents look like. I mean, the whole secret, again, this whole idea that you're stepping into the past, like all of the southern states are just either in the 50s or worse off. I just thought that kind of wrapped it up perfectly. The fact that his parents are just like, listen, make him look like that painting, American Gothic. That would work perfectly. Ridiculous. Oh, and the doctors are idiots. That's the last thing I'm going to say. They had so many opportunities to escape. They could have just left the truck at any moment and fucking run. And that is exactly what, like, dude, he's making necklaces with ears on it. How about when he goes into the chamber and decides to have a nap, you walk out the door and you fuck off.
Yeah. I mean, it's off the books. Nobody's going to go looking for you. It's just
they've got so many opportunities to just leave.
The last thing I wanted to mention was the end fight scene. What's he wearing around his head that all of a sudden they're chasing the prison bus and he is just Andrew Scott. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden at the farm, he seems to have had his own adventure because he's got so many medals, like sheriff's badges and stuff on his vest.
Yeah, it's never explained.
Yeah, and then he's wearing what I first thought was like a rattleskin skin around his head, but then there's a feather hanging down. Like, what happened during his adventure? Did he just go off on like some sort of tangent?
It feels like, nowadays there would be like a comic book run which kind of explained what happened to Andrew Scott in that sequence when he suddenly shows up. And he really does become, as I said, he goes full Kurgan at the end of the film. There's a great chase sequence when he's just randomly throwing grenades at their truck. By the way, what's her name? Veronica Corningstone is what I'm going to call her. She's very calm about just throwing grenades back out of a bus. But that like the end, and this will lead into Love and Hate. It feels like the end of the film is really rushed, and a big part of that is I feel like a whole section with Dolph Lundgren's character, which would explain his weird jacket, all the badges, and yes, the feather in his fucking headwear would have been explained. So yeah, you just kind of go with it in the film, but no, it doesn't make any sense, and nobody has the answer to that question.
Not at all. No. None at all.
I will Love and Hate. I've not actually written anything down. For someone, every so often I just forget one of our sections, and this week it's Love and Hate. But I will, for Love, top of the list is Dolph Lundgren for me. I love Dolph Lundgren. As I said, as a villain, I think that's where he's at his best. And those, like his three most iconic performances. I'm not going to include The Punisher, unsurprisingly, from 1989.
I love The Punisher.
Oh no, that film's so bad. Anyway, that's another tangent waiting to happen. I love the direction of this film, the level of action. As I mentioned, I think this was, him getting, and when I say him, I mean Roland Emmerich, getting that balance in terms of budget to scale and his amount of power over the movie. He was, I think, really good at making kind of basically mid-level action movies. And I think his success in Independence Day, a movie that I love, kind of led to his movies becoming somewhat overblown. And what else do I love? Oh, the fact that like the time scale for this movie is insane. The fact that it's supposed to be set in the modern day, but looks half 2042 and half 1952. It's such a strange film in many respects. And again, I think part of that comes from the budget. He's blown most of the budget on 3 action set pieces, and the rest of it is just them in the desert. So that's it. But yeah, I think it's on an aesthetic level, it makes for a very interesting movie.
So I'm with you with Dolph. I love him in this film. He is having the time of his life in this film.
100%.
Yeah, he's loving it. I love the final fight scene, the intense action, but also the drama, the danger. I think it's done so well. They're doing really, really well together, the fighting and everything. And then obviously you throw in the American Gothic parents as well. I love the final fight scene. And to be fair, I really struggled with A Third Love because there's just a lot in this film. But I love the simple little humor, the little jokes, like go on, run through it. Run through what? Like the brick wall, like is that supposed to be there, or look for something hard? Just all these little random that he doesn't get. But on top of that, I will say we didn't mention a lot about it, but I love Van Damme's. All I can say is like his smell the fart acting. Like he's constantly just looking into the distance because he's meant to be confused all the time. I think he does really well with it.
No, I think he does. And like there are moments, and it's actually one of my hates, but it does bring some kind of, there are some good moments that come from it, is the inconsistent tone of this movie.
Yeah.
And, sometimes, as I said, there's quite a lot of body horror in this film. But at times, and to speak specifically to your point on Jean-Claude Van Damme there, it's almost kind of like, clownishly comedic. And don't get me wrong, he probably gets the balance just about right. But there's quite a bit of physical comedy in this movie. There's one bit when he faints, for instance.
Yeah.
And it's full on played for laughs. Like he doesn't just fall over like, oh my God, he's in trouble. He kind of like faints like an old kind of deer from a 1920s movie. He's like, oh, like, the only thing he doesn't do is like bring his hand to his forehead as he falls down. But yeah, like I said, my hate is the fact that inconsistently, I'm not quite sure this film ever pins down exactly what it wants to be, but it does lead to some, interesting moments of comedy. But in terms of other hates, yeah, it's the idiot doctors. Like, I can't be dealing with them. They had so many opportunities to leave. And the fact that I do think towards the end in particular, this movie feels rushed. I'm the same as you. I love the final action sequence, but this film kind of like, it feels like they're going somewhere with the plot and then they decide, listen, we're just going to wrap this up. We're just going to turn this into a chase and a big action sequence at the end of the film. I don't think I ever really cared about the fact that he found his parents. There's that sequence when he goes to see, Jesus Christ, what is his name? Jerry Orbach is the doctor, where they kind of just throw a lot of information at the wall just to kind of wrap things up as quickly as possible. And all those moments I just never cared about. Like, I just never cared about the larger narrative, and I think I mentioned earlier the fact that there are some pretty big ideas in this movie in regards to PTSD and identity and stuff. And they hint at it towards the end of the film with these moments, but they never deal with it in any kind of convincing way. And I think that's probably my biggest issue with the movie overall.
Jerry Orbach, the bad guy in a gnome named Gnome. the film we talked about, Gnome.
Oh, Gnome, you see the bad guy in that.
The bad guy in that.
He's got one of those really memorable faces, but he's like that guy. He's like one of these kind of memorable character actors where I'm like, I know I've seen him in a million things, but I can really not name any of them except for that, of course.
Like I'm constantly always seeing him, and he died in like 2004. So you're not seeing, but you will see him in a lot of things over the course of watching films and stuff. He's in everything.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's the thing. I didn't even know he had passed away, but it's one of those, like, if he'd shown up in a movie looking exactly the same, I don't think I would have questioned it, despite the fact that, he died in 2004, so that would be pretty weird. But yeah, he's one of these guys who just shows up. And as I said, it's a shame that he doesn't get more to do in this movie. But as I said, I think towards the end, they were more interested in just kind of wrapping this up as an action movie, as a body horror movie, and not really dealing with any of the concepts that they had built with or that the page potentially had. So as I said, that's my biggest issue with this film, and maybe the reason it doesn't sit in the same categories as your RoboCops or your Terminators.
So my hates are the doctors, as you've already said. They were just stupid. They could have left at any point.
Yeah, they were up there with the doctors from, remember Prometheus?
Yeah.
Yeah, those idiots. It was like, oh, let's go look at this horrible fucking alien snake thing. You know, it's like those level where you're like, come on, guys, you're supposed to be doctors. You can't be that dumb. Although my wife's a doctor, and obviously she works with a lot of scientists. You know, she's a scientist doctor, not kind of people doctor, if that makes sense. And a lot of them, not all of them, but I meet some of the people she works with, and they are idiots. And I think it's because their field becomes so singular. Like the further you go into science, the kind of more narrow your range is. Well, so they know how to do these really specific things, but it feels like it comes at the cost of all their life skills. So maybe that explains things.
There's a thing, though, isn't there? It says, like, you can be smart, you can be so intelligent, but you kind of lack common sense.
Oh, 100%.
So, yeah.
The douchey thing is like they don't have street smart, but there is 100% an element of that. And you see it with stuff like, University Challenge. These people who are clearly geniuses, but I don't think it's an accident that so few of them clearly don't have any social skills. They just look awkward and uncomfortable being human beings because they spend so much of their time thinking about things which are obviously so much more important. Yeah. But of course, you and I are spending most of our time watching stupid movies from the 80s and speaking, I like thinking relatively eloquently about it. But ask me anything about science and I'm just going to jump out of the fucking window in a panic. So there we go.
Absolutely. Just run away.
We all have our talents.
My other one is the general, the leader. He's angry all the time.
Well, you would be as well. It's been this project's been working for like 30 years. They finally put it into practice, and it fails almost immediately. It's a rubbish project.
And I had to say, what I did hate, I know you liked it, but it just made me laugh. The command unit, again, the fact it takes so long to open up. Again, it goes to the fact that it's just a rubbish project. It's like, oh, we're state of the art. Let's open our truck. Oh, they've killed all the hostages. Let's close the truck back up.
I just don't think any training has gone into that. Like, they show a certain level of competence. Is it the Hoover Dam, the opening sequence?
Yeah, I believe it is, yeah.
Yeah, which is a pretty cool sequence. And even that goes slightly wrong, maybe a bit too violent. But basically, that shows like a kind of elite unit kind of going in under the radar, taking out the terrorists, whatever you want to call them, and, you know, saving all the hostages. Everything after that, they just show up and shoot everything. Like the plans go out the windows. Any sense of tactics are abandoned almost immediately after that. Yeah. So you can understand why you might be slightly upset.
So that was it. That was my 3.
Well, it's you up next, sir, because Legacy is next. Oh, no, Fax is next. Sorry, I do apologize. And that's you as well.
It was famous back in 92. I don't know if anyone remembers it now. But in the Cannes Film Festival, Van Damme and Lundgren had an altercation outside. It was all over. Yeah, it was all over the news. Like they faced off with each other, and it was big business or big news at that time. But Lundgren admitted in like a 2018 podcast it was actually for the film. It was just to get some marketing for the film.
Which is genius. It's just a shame that they didn't do the same thing with Nicolas Cage and John Travolta, because like the headlines write themselves. Like they face off at the face-off premiere. It's like, oh my God, that would be absolutely fantastic. But yeah, the idea of having these two stars like fighting each other on screen, like pretending that they're actually going to have a fight, absolutely genius.
The one thing I didn't mention because I wanted to save it for facts was we were talking about Tom Tiny Lister Jr. He was famous for only having one eye. Yeah. They actually had to have his eyepiece custom made because the regular eyepiece design was blocking his good eye. So that ostensibly they just made him blind.
Brilliant. Yeah. Fantastic.
It's funny how you have mentioned the woman from Total Recall and you've mentioned like Terminator and Terminator 2 whilst talking about this film, because the film's trailer reuses the music from Total Recall and Terminator 2.
There's little hints, again, like the score, which we will mention briefly, does have elements of those movies for sure.
Yeah. Nearly all of the ice required for filming, an estimated 400 kilograms, came from a local 7-Eleven in Arizona. The manager of that store was invited on a tour of the Nugget Ice Corporation factory as his sales figures were so impressively high.
absolutely slaying it, you know? A big victory for the little man.
Dolph Lundgren and Ralph Moeller, who was the German, we've already said the German GR, whatever number he was.
GR 76.
Yeah, they co-starred together in this film. Years later, both actors auditioned for the role of Hagen in Gladiator. Lundgren lost the role due to the director Ridley Scott being unimpressed by his acting.
Oh, yeah. Ouch. Well, he was never famed for his acting.
What else have I got here? We said it. Michael Jai White was briefly shown as one of the soldiers in Vietnam near the beginning of the film. Mm-hmm. White would go on to be featured in a large role in the first theatrical sequel to the film, Universal Soldier: The Return. I'll tell you what, that'll lead us into Legacy.
Oh, wait, there's one more fact.
I'll go on.
Tika Wells played the only ever black Garth committed to cinema. I'm convinced. To give a black guy the name Garth, I'm just not buying a black dude being called Garth. I'm sorry. I'm not sure if that's an official fact, but I suddenly realized at the list of like the cast, I was like, Tika Williams played Garth. It's like I remember hearing it in the film. I was like, Garth, you're really going to give him the name Garth? What the fuck? It felt like the director didn't like him, so we're going to call him Garth. I just, like I said, it's like a black dude. I don't know. I just don't buy a black dude being called Garth. Sorry. Anyway, moving on to Legacy. I feel like I briefly derailed the podcast there.
No, I mean, this podcast never hit the rails.
No. We've all, I think we've been kind of like near the rails at times, but we've never quite got on. But yeah, Legacy, man. I mean, this is all you because this has such a unique like cinematic history. Maybe the most of any movie I can think of. So
they this was released in 1992. Then they released 2 made-for-television films in 1998. Universal Soldier 2, Brothers in Arms, and Universal Soldier 3, Unfinished Business. This brought back the Unisols, and Luke Devereaux's long-lost brother, Eric Devereaux, and it became a CIA Black Ops team led by the CIA guy was Burt Reynolds, and the general leading the GR-44 people was Gary Busey.
And these were the straight-to-DVD sequels, weren't they?
Straight-to-television.
Oh, straight-to... So even a step down from straight-to-video. Straight-to-television sequels. So there was 2 sequels, and they were both straight-to-TV. Okay, gotcha.
So they were released in 1998, and then Van Damme decided to come back. Mm-hmm. So as Luke Devereaux. So they thought, you know what? These 2 television films no longer exist. Because they had a Luke Devereaux in them, So you then had Universal Soldier: The Return, which brought back Luke Devereaux as a human.
Yeah.
Okay. They managed to reverse the Unisol. Right. They managed to reverse.
Yeah. Well, they had to explain the fact that he'd aged like 15 years, I suppose. Yeah.
They managed to reverse death. Right. And he's got a daughter.
Was Goldberg in that one as well?
Yes. Goldberg was in it.
That's right.
So they're bringing back the Universal Soldier program. Luke Devereaux is just training the Unisols. And then they bring Michael Jai White, who we just previously mentioned, he was the voice of Seth, which was a computer program. Mm-hmm. But Seth also became a Unisol himself. There was like a clone body that was made, and they put the computer consciousness into this body to have a showdown with Luke Devereaux. So that was that. That's by the by. It's a sequel. Everyone, all right, that's good. 10 years later, in 2009, Universal Soldier Regeneration. Okay, they bring back Van Damme.
Now this is now the 5th movie, but the 2nd official sequel.
Yeah. And they bring back Van Damme, and I'm pretty sure Regeneration also brought back. Yeah, it did. Yeah,
brought Dolph Lundgren.
Yeah. Right, but now Van Damme is once again a Unisol.
Jesus Christ.
He has to go into Chernobyl to take on Andrew Scott, who for some reason is just taking over Chernobyl. Right?
Of course he is, despite the fact that, again, he's dead. And not only dead, and I'm sure like someone who's seen all these movies would be like, oh, but this is explained. He was not only killed, he was killed in a wood chipper.
Yeah.
Like, he was so killed. You can't get any more killed than that. I'm like, how did you bring back Andrew Scott? That's insane.
And then the last film, Universal Soldier: Day of Reckoning, where now...
Oh, shit. So this is the 6th movie, but 3rd official sequel.
Luke Devereaux and Dolph Lundgren are now on the same team.
Of course, that always happens eventually.
And they are... So they're a terrorist organization, right?
Of course, yeah.
So Luke Devereaux has now become some sort of Osama bin Laden character.
Yeah.
Who is leading his own terrorist cell. Guy who I love, Scott Adkins. Fantastic martial artist. always in a lot of straight to DVD films. But you should.
I mean, in terms of like his choreography and that, like unbelievable.
Don't sleep on Scott Adkins as an actor and a martial arts actor. He's fantastic. But now he is the next Universal Soldier who keeps being brought back to life as a clone to take on Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren.
Oh my goodness! I mean, but the only series which might come close to this in terms of just being batshit crazy and having such a weird lineage is maybe Highlander, maybe
or Tremors.
But but those were at least like straight to DVD or straight to TV, and they kind of committed to that. Highlander had that whole thing where it's like a half a TV show, but in terms of like making sequels, going the straight DVD route or straight to TV route, and then bringing back the original stars, and then having that whole other kind of series of batshit crazy, let's be clear, straight to like DVD sequels, despite the fact that the first one did get a brief cinema run. I don't think anything can match Universal Soldier in terms of just having an absolutely batshit crazy legacy. But the fact of the matter is, of all things, and you can make the argument you'd lose something without Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren. But this movie could totally be remade. Like, it's a great concept. And even if you did it as a TV show, because, like, do you want to dig deeper into those kind of themes, which, again, are hinted at in this film? And I'm sure they're dealt with to one extent or another in the sequels. I'm never going to watch them. But one thing I will ask, though, is have you seen all of these?
Yes.
All of them?
Yes.
Including the Burt Reynolds one?
Yes.
Oh my goodness, dude! I mean, you're just in a different league to me. You're just, but this is the kind of pro level commitment this podcast needs.
They tried to write a TV series back in 2011, didn't get off the ground, but they're still writing a script for a Universal Soldier remake back since 2018, where it's going to be focused on just one soldier brought back.
Yeah. Well, like I said, this is prime for a remake, because I know you've seen all of them like an absolute psycho, and I've got quite fond memories of the original and stuff. But it's not beloved in the same way that RoboCop is, like Terminator is.
Oh, no.
You could it's a good concept. You could totally get away with remaking this. There would be a little bit of a hoo-ha online, but for the most part, people would be accepting of it. It's like the cool thing is like the aesthetic still stands up. Like the Universal Soldier, even though it's like 92, that military aesthetic just looks cool. So
I wanted to say the television film Brothers in Arms, Universal Soldier 2 Brothers in Arms, they redo the fight scene at the beginning of the film from the end of the film, Universal Soldier.
Okay, yeah.
The whole chipper, they do that. But it's really weird to see the Van Damme Lundgren one and then this fight.
yeah. It's always rough when they try and remake sequences. It never works. It never works. You always lose that magic.
But the guy that's doing it is an actual American. So now you've got an American guy being Luke Devereaux saying,
"Oh, it's horrible. That's horrible." Yeah, I'm never watching these. I
mean, they are on Pluto TV, so you can watch them for free.
No, I'm fine. There's the whole thing that my life is finite, so I'm going to give those a miss, I think. In terms of score and soundtrack, I mean, nothing sums up the inconsistent tone of this movie better than the end credit song, Body Count, from the album Body Count by the band Body Count.
Where the fuck did that song come from at the end?
It's insane. Like, you have this like ultra violent scene. It's got like quite a sweet moment where they have like that hug at the end, and then it goes into this like aggressive rap rock song. I was like, there's no way that band's called Body Count. The song's called Body Count from the album Body Count. That is absolutely true. That is exactly what happened. That song was partly written by Ice-T. And that summed it up. Like, the movie ended, and I was trying to kind of get my head around how I felt about it, and that song immediately popped up, and I was like, oh yeah, conflicted. That's how I feel about this movie. And a big part of that is
conflicted. Where the fuck did that song come from?
It's so strange. I mean, the score itself by Christopher Frank, he's done a lot of TV work, Stranger Things. He's a former member of Tangerine Dream, of all things, but he worked on a lot of like 80s. You remember when like there was like the ninja craze in Hollywood? They were trying to make like ninja films with white actors. I always remember, I think it was American Ninja was the
Michael
one I watched a lot of. Yeah, oh, dude, I knew you would know Michael Dudikoff. But that was the biggest.
I've seen all of them as well.
Oh, dude, I loved the first one when I was younger. I suspect it hasn't aged well. I watched it the bit of the second one, like so many of these, I was like, okay, I think I'm done here. But of course, you just plow through and watch all 17 of them, however many there are.
Even when they replaced Michael Dudikoff, he was gone.
When you've got a series and they replace Michael Dudikoff because Michael Dudikoff doesn't want to make the films anymore, it's time to call it a goddamn day. Yeah. But yeah, he worked on Bionic Ninja and Ninja Champion. I was like, you might not have even seen those.
No, I haven't heard of them.
Oh, and he also worked on Ghost Dad in 1990 with Bill Cosby, which was like, I actually have oddly fond memories of Ghost Dad. Of course, that has been somewhat tarnished by the fact that Bill Cosby was incredibly rapey. But I did formerly. It's a shame when, you were kind of like, oh yeah, I remember like that being this really sweet film. Oh, but it starred that very rapey Bill Cosby, so that's a bit of a shame. But yeah, like the score is absolutely fine. But what I'll always take from this movie is the soundtrack, and very specifically Body Count, because it comes out of nowhere. It is the musical equivalent of a punch to your groin. That's what that is. So the last section we've got is video games. And this is a really weird one because there was a video game which I absolutely adored when I was younger, and it was called Turrican, side-scrolling action game.
Yeah.
And basically this company, Code Monkeys, had the rights to the sequel, Turrican 2, another very good game. And they were going to release Turrican 2, but because they had the rights to the code, they just reskinned it as Universal Soldier. So Universal Soldier is the video game which came out for the Mega Drive and Game Boy back in 92, 93, is just Turrican 2, but just with they've replaced the Space Soldier from that game.
Yeah.
And put in sprites of Jean-Claude Van Damme, to the point where at the end of the first level of Turrican 2, you fight a giant mech dragon, and they've replaced the giant mech dragon with a giant Dolph Lundgren. And when I say giant, I mean like 200-foot tall Dolph Lundgren. Because, of course, they've already got the sprites for this boss battle. They're like, well, we can't have Jean-Claude Van Damme fighting a giant mech dragon. That doesn't make any sense. Well, let's have him fight Dolph Lundgren. But he'll be 100-foot tall. Well, this is the 90s. This is the Mega Drive. We're just going to go for it. So, yes, its history with video games is bizarre as its legacy of straight-to-DVD movies. It's a strange selection, for sure. But in terms of what I'd want from a modern-day Universal Soldier video game, I mean, it's a great concept for a video game. It kind of, it's an easy sell. But I thought, rather than go the usual route, what modern-day video game would you reskin as a Universal Soldier game? The one that came to my mind, I think it was just an excuse to bring it up, was Infinite Warfare, because I think it's the most underrated of all the Call of Duty games. And basically, you just remove the jetpacks and just pretend it's just their Universal Soldier powers, which are never clearly defined. But I would just reskin Infinite Warfare and just make it Universal Soldier Warfare or whatever. But the idea of them just taking a modern-day video game and just reskinning it and just putting Jean-Claude Van Damme in it and just saying, oh, this is a Universal Soldier game now is absolutely... It's unthinkable, but that's what they used to do in the 90s. Insane.
Well, to be fair, that actually bodes well for my choice. You could reskin it, absolutely. Metal Gear Solid.
Oh, genius choice. Genius choice.
You could reskin Metal Gear Solid and have Snake become Luke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you absolutely could. And again, you could, you kind of go to the kind of more thoughtful side of the concept is, kind of Metal Gear Solid, because a lot of that is dialogue. But just reskin Metal Gear Solid, make him Luke Devereaux instead, and you're off to the races. It doesn't really make any sense, but that's the whole point. It absolutely doesn't have to. But that's pretty much it for Universal Soldier. So I guess it's just down to recommendations and review scores. So would you recommend this to others?
This one, not the 7 sequels.
Well, that goes without saying, unless you were being an absolute dick. You definitely don't recommend the sequels.
No, I would. I mean, if you were a fan of the Van Damme era, as we said, between late 80s, early 90s, then this definitely stands up there as well. So no, I would definitely recommend it. And in terms of score, it is middle of the road, isn't it? I mean, we have fun with it, but it's definitely middle of the road. Maybe even falls under a 3. Like, it's just skirting a 3 for me, I think. I really enjoy it as I watch it, but there's a lot that can be done with it to move it forward. And it's basically just, if it was released now, it'd be released straight to DVD, this kind of film. So,
oh no, I think you've been a little bit harsh on it. I think it feels cinematic enough to me to feel like a kind of big budget. I know the budget wasn't massive, but I feel like it feels cinematic in that way that I think it belongs on the big screen. But I do largely agree with you. And my wife, as soon as it finished and body count started, she looked at me and she goes, "That was awful, wasn't it?" And I was like, it's like I actually quite liked it.
Yeah.
I think it's a bang on 3-star film. Like, bang on. Couldn't be a more 3-star movie if it tried. A big part of that is Dolph Lundgren and Jean-Claude Van Damme, whose performances I both love in this film.
It's a pity they didn't do more together.
It is. Well, we've mentioned it on nearly every podcast because nearly every film that we love from the 80s and early 90s, they all had direct-to-DVD sequels. And you just think it's a shame that if you were going to make a sequel, and I would have been happy if this had just been, and as far as my brain is concerned, this movie happened and then Universal Soldier just went away because I didn't watch any of the sequels. But if you're going to make a sequel, it should have come out in 95. It should have had, this movie made a lot of money. Like, why not? If this movie was budgeted at 23 million, this should have come out with a 50 million budget sequel like a few years later and really pushed the idea of Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren being bigger movie stars. But obviously it never happened, and that's not the way the movie industry worked at the time. But yeah, I don't think I would recommend. I don't think it's a film to be avoided if it's on TV. If one of my friends like, "Oh, Universal Soldier's not on, I've never seen it," I'd be like, "Yeah, it's not a bad film. You probably enjoy it." But that's different to me kind of like shouting out the window at strangers, "Boy, have you not seen Universal Soldier?" I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to tell the guys in work that they have to see this film because at the end of the day, it's just fine. It's a 3-star film. I enjoyed it. It's not quite as good as I remember. And as I said, I don't. The ending feels particularly rushed, but the main reason I might recommend it to anyone is because of Jean-Claude Van Damme and Dolph Lundgren, who are both great in it. But yeah, 3 stars and probably wouldn't recommend it.
Well, that basically just leaves us now, and I'm very intrigued to what we're going to be covering next week.
My God, is this one of those weird ones where we've already decided, where I should already know what we've picked for next week?
Absolutely, mate. No, I haven't got a clue. You haven't told me.
Well, I haven't actually given any thought to this whatsoever. So what I'm going to do in a surprise, I'm not going to say because I don't want to say, I was just going to say like kickboxer maybe because we were talking about Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Yeah.
But what we'll say is keep an eye on Facebook. We send out teasers. I will give this some thought over the next hour or two and I'll put something on Facebook relatively soon. But as it stands, I was kind of the mindset that we had already had this conversation. We obviously haven't. So as to what we'll be recording next week, I have no idea. Rob clearly has no idea, but we will put it on Facebook relatively soon.
Way to be prepared this week.
I know. Didn't do Love or Hate, didn't pick a movie for next week. Jesus Christ. So yeah, this has been Universal Soldier, a 3-star movie, which we wouldn't really recommend. Join us next week for God knows what, but thanks as always for listening. So where can people actually find us?
Oh, well, people can actually find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at HeyYouGuys80s. You can also drop us an email at HeyYouGuys80s@gmail.com. We like to read them out on the show, so please feel free to send them in. Any recommendations, just get in touch with us. We do like that. And we'd like to thank, as always, Darry Fletcher at Darry Doodles for the fantastic artwork that we're now producing.
Cheers, Darry. And a big thank you to Alexander Orteland for the awesome intro music. He has no media presence as far as I can tell. He's very mysterious, but makes great music. So thank you very much.
And we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.
Bye. Hey, you guys!